So far we have covered 3 chapters and now we are going to 4th chapter, which call experience, space and justice. Spaces and the language of mobilization. As I will argue in the following section of this chapter, those who are pushed into servile experience are likely to adopt a language of self-respect and dignity. The ability to restructure and at times annihilate or liberate these spaces provide reason for the protagonist to deploy a new conceptual vocabulary that they find necessary to intensify the experience both spatially and intellectually. The intellectual or political mobilization of Dalit masses by Ambedkar and peasantry by Gandhi testify to this intensification, as we shall see in a greater detail in the following section. In the case of Gandhi, reason moral is invoked internally from within the tradition, while Ambedkar seems to be invoking reason both internally, heterodox traditions such as Buddhism, Kabir or Jyotirao Phule, and externally, modern and perhaps Western tradition. Both these thinkers deploy experience as well as space in order to produce sets of categories that are morally in the case of Gandhi and politically in the case of Ambedkar, motivating as far as the mobilization of the masses is concerned. Both these thinkers seems to be approaching their respective social constituencies with a different set of categories emanating from differential experience. Both of them, of course, confront the spaces that are hostile to their emancipatory project. Gandhi's project obviously involved the rectification and recovery of spaces, while Ambedkar seeks radical subversion of these spaces. We shall see how it's happened in both the cases. It is already clear from the above section that there is a particular epistemological claim that is involved in the title of this chapter. Here, we argue that experience provide an initial epistemological condition for the creative reflection or theoretical representation of experience. Categories that emerge from the mediation between experience and space tend to empower a particular argument. Gandhi deployed the moral category of seva in order to forge the intra-group solidarity that he thought was necessary for producing the conjecture, namely India's independence. Ambedkar, on the other hand, invoked the category of self-respect that signify the transcendence of Bahishkrit Bharat, the idea of excluded the untouchables, into Prabuddha Bharat, the India of the enlightened people. Gandhi's argument suggests a kind of reconfiguration of India that is arguably ahistorical and hence mythical in nature, Ramarajya. While Ambedkar's argument suggests a radically different kind of reconfiguration of India that is fundamentally historical in that it assumes that Bahishkrit Bharat is the result of social processes that are historically produced and reproduced by the totality of social dominance, and that Prabuddha Bharat emerged from critical reappropriation of heterodox tradition. Both Gandhi and Ambedkar share one thing in common. For both of them, experience provide the vantage point for making epistemological moves and also for ideological or political mobilization of the masses. However, there is a fundamental difference between the two. Gandhi experiment with the experience of the self and other. Thus, the experience of Ambedkar and his community become an object of Gandhi's experiment. Ambedkar and his entire untouchable community do not have to experiment in order to produce experience. In fact, untouchable are born into it. This is an instance of the live experience that was referred to in chapter 1. Both Ambedkar and Gandhi draw fundamentally upon live experience in order to build theoretical insight, and one could argue that it is entirely due to their different live experiences that their theoretical formulation differ. To put it differently, Ambedkar gets ontologically related to the experience that is deposited in him by the tormentors. It is for this reason that Gandhi very rightly chooses to work with upper caste tormentor. Both Ambedkar and Gandhi generate a set of moral or political category that they deploy to motivate the masses for the purification of society in the first case and the purification of the soul in the second. However, both Gandhi and Ambedkar do not produce this motivating category a priori. Both of them suggest perhaps Ambedkar more consistently and forcefully than Gandhi, that an insight into social dynamics and examination of all the minute details constituting social reality at local level must form the basis of knowledge. It could be argued that a universal principle in its abstract form does offer, at least to some, a tantalizing insight, but this particular quality of universal principle was not favored either by Ambedkar or Gandhi. Both these thinkers produced and shaped their categories through detailed knowledge that was produced not simply by reading texts but by experiencing the context in varying degrees. Both these thinkers of modern India gained an understanding of social nuances and an adequate understanding of India through voyage, voyages across Indian regions. The detailed investigation and incisive interrogation of experiential spaces both by Gandhi and Ambedkar did not force them to essentialize a universal principle. Commentators in contemporary India now seek to universalize the idea of both Ambedkar and Gandhi, often forgetting the formative importance of that specificity of experience that got factored into the very formation of the idea of the latter. Ambedkar's category are embedded into an agnosticism territory, but they do not stay there. They move out into emancipatory sphere. There, there are some scholars who have sought to address the deficiency in the post-colonial framework and pointed out that this framework is lacking account of its failure to invoke space as a category for the fuller understanding of nationalist thought in India. Such a critical take on post-colonial thought no doubt acknowledge the usefulness of the post-colonial perspective for understanding the derivative impact of the European Enlightenment on Indian political thought during the nationalist era. Goswami, with specific reference to an important work by Partha Chatterjee, makes a claim that such intervention, though desirable, is not adequate as Chatterjee's critique of nationalist thought and its dynamics depends too much on the discursive content of the European tradition. She therefore rightly argued that for a fuller understanding of the colonial impact on India, we need to take into account the concept of space. Her critique of her critique of Chatterjee may in a certain sense be valid, but in an instance of spiral logic, her framework also suffer from the same limitation that she find in Chatterjee's work. As I will show in my analysis of space and experience, Goswami use of space does not exhaust all the reference points that surround the reality of experience. Secondly, while she is right in placing emphasis on the need to bring in centrally the category of space, but in doing so, she quotes only selectively from Henry Lefebvre's widely acknowledged work on space. But I seek to go beyond the post-colonial take on nationalist thought and argue that space as an explanatory category is better equipped to understand adequately the colonial impact on various aspects of Indian reality. For example, taking her cue from Lefebvre, Goswami recontextualized space as a social relationship between the colonial state and the Indian society. Again, basing her import of space on Lefebvre works, she further states that space is at once a central field of action and basis for action. This conception is no doubt useful in understanding the actions of nationalist leaders against the colonial state, but the main limitation of such an import is that it seeks to challenge the self-understanding of the colonial state as the benevolent lord only in the colonial configuration of power. It thus makes a huge concession to the local lords who adversely dampen several social groups in local configuration of power. These local lords in Jyotirao Phule's language are Shetji and Bhattji, and in Ambedkar's Brahman Shahi and Bhandwal Shahi. Brahminism and capitalism. Will cover in next section.